Gamers Pick podcast, picks and perspective with Chris Johnson. Palpable paradox.
That I personally know, I don't know a lot of pick nerds, to be honest. But you may be the nerdiest that I know. You may
I'll
be.
take that as a massive compliment.
Yeah, it's a massive compliment. It's like, you actually have a far-reaching, more wide knowledge of the pick world and the Plectroverse at large than even my friend Jimmy Dunlop. He's at the top of the Dunlop game, right? But and he studies a lot of other picks. But man, when I'm looking at your store, I'm just baffled. I already know this, but how many brands do you rep for, sir?
I think it's very kind of you to say, firstly. We do, I think it's around 20 odd. So Arcana Mace, BHL, Northern Ghost, formerly Chrys Customs. Liam's taking a wee break at the moment. Rens Hendricks is also on a break because he's doing blacksmithing just now. Tantris, who's a shirt I'm wearing just now, and Plectrum and a whole bunch of others. So yeah, it's healthy. I'm not going to lie. I'd like to get everybody, but you can't have it all. So
now, are you stocking personally? Are these shipping to you and then you're shipping out and fulfilling, or are they more of a will they drop ship for you?
So when I started the idea of doing the shop, we floated a couple of different ideas, but we happened to launch at the same time as all the Brexit negotiations, and I use that term very loosely, were going on here in the UK, and it didn't make sense for a lot of the makers to ship to me and then ship out because it was extra cost we were incurring, and also with the volume of sales, and also the value of those sales, it didn't make sense. So I personally distribute Rombo, Plectrum, Timber Tones. I previously did Zwart as well, and there is Gravity, and the rest of the makers all ship direct, because the Rombo and Plectrum particularly are in Germany, and shipping out of Germany because they're in Central Europe is quite hard. But also a lot of stuff is made to order, so it would be impossible for me to have stock and all the rest of it. And also this way, more money goes to the sellers, which is kind of the whole point of the exercise. So yeah, we got people all over the world, in Hong Kong, the Netherlands, Italy, France, like all sorts. A lot in the US as well, and a few in the UK, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that sounds like a smart business model. I figured there had to be some sort of collaboration around the drop ship and having your shop be a showcase for a lot of the picks that were available that could ship from other stores, so to speak, right? It's a smart model. And there's not, even though some of these picks are expensive, they can't, you would destroy any profit in them by shipping them twice, I think.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Them, right?
There's the margin, a lot of the stuff with this, it's dependent on material, but material and time and the craft that goes into it. A lot of material is harder on tools than other stuff. So the UHMWP stuff you get from people like PHL, that's incredibly hard on tools, and it's much, much harder to work. Acrylic and Keranite and Acrylester, they're not as difficult, but it's the time. And if you see, as I know you have, if you see picks like things like your Arcanum, stuff like this, like the Paladin, that is, when you buy from people through the shop, or you buy from any makers in the pick community, there's only a handful, and when I say a handful, maybe two guys that have more than one person in that company. So when you buy from Windspear, it's Tom Windspear. If you buy from Stone Age, it's Matt Halliday. If you buy from Arcanum, it's Nads. It's Brock doing everything. So these are independent people, and it's their time. And some of them do it full time, and some of them do it on top of other things. But it's very, very time consuming to do all that polishing, have all the tools in the outlay, whether they're doing CNC or not. And to use the right sort of polish to get everything right. So it's funny, the expense thing. I was talking to somebody about at work about this the other day, and we're so used to the whole, obviously your man Dunlop, and I've very much got plenty of those on the go, but but when you're injection molding, as you are with that, the cost goes way down because you make the cast, and most of the money goes into the cast, and after that, it's just a question of repetition. And those picks have a lifespan and all that sort of stuff. But we're used to that. We're used to that in the West with Dunlop and with Clayton, and then in the East with Pickboy, and latterly companies like Master 8, all that sort of stuff. But there's less involved in the process, and the picks don't last as long. People are more, as guitarists tend to be, particularly more careless with things. So they're like, oh, I'll buy a bag of 12 picks, I'll probably lose 5 of them. One of the things with buying higher end stuff, I'm going to call it, is the fact that if you spend $15 or $20 on a pick, you tend not to lose them because it's so unbelievably stressful when you do. And I've misplaced stuff the last couple of years, but I've never lost anything because I'll turn the house upside down to find it, especially because a lot of it's one-offs. So unrepeatable materials, unrepeatable shapes, unrepeatable lines. Some people do stuff for a period of time, they never make it again. And all that stuff does last a lot longer, and it does feel like an event. So I think that's kind of where it's a weird line. It's like with guitars. If all guitars had been from the 50s to the present day, if they'd all been $100, and then somebody brought out a guitar that was 500 quid, you go, what? £500? Are you mad? But that's, we just accept a lot of that. We accept that, an American Strat is, well, in £1,700 or £1,500, whatever, because that's the price that's been set. So it's a normality thing, I think, with all that stuff.
No, it's good. It's good to hear the contrast in how you set the tone there, because you're right. Like before I was ever even thinking about doing a podcast or getting more into picks, I had bought a couple of picks from Ricky Plecter, and just because I happened upon his site, and I was like, oh, those are so cool, and bought a few, and then I've kind of misplaced them a couple times, but I've now I have a little bit more, I wouldn't say it's a really organized situation, but I know which boxes and which shelves. I got some of them on display out here.
Yeah.
And some of those, I go through seasons of really feeling like I only want to play that pick for a while. So it's sitting out on my desk.
Yeah.
And you can probably attest to this. I mean, the problem for someone like yourself or myself, where we're literally surrounded by the world's greatest plectrums. How do you choose which one you're playing today?
I think it is quite a common thing, that, especially if you get into collecting anything. I think if you get into, I know a lot of pedal guys like this, where they've got, and I collected pedals before I got into picks, and you end up, as we all do, you end up kind of collecting a lot of the same derivatives of the same thing, let's call it. So you might have a lot of fuzzes or overdrives, but they're all on central axis, and you have more extreme versions of this and whatever. I think the thing with the pick thing, I always look forward to new stuff, because that's part of why I get into this. I do like not hoarding, but accumulation, I'm going to call it, because I like having lots of little things, and I'm, no point in pretending that's not the case. But I think with it, you go through little phases of, I feel like, and I play it to death. And then I think, do you know what? I haven't tried that in a while. I'll get one of those out. And I do play, I don't play favorites in the community, because I'm all about bringing all the makers up. That's kind of the whole point of what I do.
Yeah.
But there are, I get material I haven't tried before, and I go crazy with that for a bit, or I get a shape I haven't tried, or sometimes you get sent a thing, it's a new maker, it's a material you haven't considered before, it's a shape you haven't considered before, and you want to really spend the time with it to understand what that maker's trying to get across. Why did they make that way? Depic Argentina is a perfect example. So your man, seeing as we're on the video, if I can get my hands on this, because you end up stacking them everywhere. I think they're up here. Daniel, who makes these, or Gabriel, sorry, who makes these, he's a gypsy jazz player. And
Okay.
gypsy jazz guys have a different hand position. So you're mostly in the scene, it's mostly people like Kelly Nonis making these. Selmer, yeah, I love these. He basically,
is that a coin as a handle, or is that what that is?
That is a brass. I don't know how fuzzy this picture is, but that is a brass replication of the old Selmer logo.
Okay.
Like from the old Macaferry stuff, and then it's got Stingray on the back, like fake leather on the back, and it's inset into, in this instance, into Galith, which is one of my favorite materials, which is casein and formaldehyde. Nice.
Oh, is that what it is?
It smells horrible when you cut it. It's like burning hair.
Ugh.
But I really like those, and that is the general thing for gypsy stuff. Gabriel stuff looks like this. This is the Kybalion, and it has 1, 2, 3, 4 screws in it and a ring, and you hold it. Well, you hold it the way you normally would. But I want to give this a chance, because when this is not the norm, right? This is right at the edge of the Plectroverse. This is properly in the outer rim, as you would say in Star Wars. And the whole thing with this is like, when this arrives, it's so far away from the norm that I want to give it the chance and I want to give it the time. So, it turns up and I'm like, right, I want to spend time with this, because they don't always make sense straight away. When I got my first Killinona stuff, because of the brass inserts and the really extreme beveling that you get for gypsy jazz, because they cut their picks kind of like that at the front rather than like this, because you got a straight hand position and you're playing this way rather than, coming in like you normally would at an angle when you're playing electric. It took a while to get used to. The brass insert took a while to get used to. It's quite heavy, but then it becomes like a pendulum thing. And after playing so many things over especially the last 3 years, seriously, because we're just about to come up on the 3rd anniversary of the rep, which is quite cool. After playing all these things over the years, I kind of know what to expect a bit more, but I do go through little things of like, I fancy playing stone for a bit, or I fancy playing this wood for a bit, or casein for a bit. And it just like, I think it's inspiring. I think they all lead you down a certain path. I don't play the same with something like a Herco Holy Grail like I would do even with like a Dunlop Jazz Polycarbonate Prime Tone, or a Flow series next to like the Celluloid Teardrops, which are super cool. I wrote about them recently, and they're super retro and very, very fun. But I think it's one of the things. I'm a big fan of having the old pot on the desk, and I keep all of it here. This rather than see it, but like all of this stuff is on the desk at the moment. And I did add it up. I did it a while ago. I filled my old pot, which is floating around in here somewhere. I filled it to the brim with picks, and then I just random. I added it up, and that was a bit frightening, if I'm honest, because it gets away with you, as is always the case for these things. But you don't realize how much, because it's only 15 quid there, 10 or there. Oh no, that's what I'm talking about. That is a healthy bowl. That's the proper stuff, man. Have you got some of your own branded ones in there?
Oh yeah, just gotta, people come by. I gotta have some Players Pick podcast picks for
nice
for the homies.
That's on the Flow series, isn't it? Very cool.
Yep, that's a Flow 1.5. Well, see, and unlike you, your positioning is really neutral and fantastic. You do such a good job of, supporting the community, and it's one of the things that I really admire about what you're up to is not only that now do you have a store that represents 20 great brands, out of like 100 or hundreds of people out there making their own picks. But your content is always, you can tell when you write a blog or you sit down and give a review about a pick or a set of picks or a style of picks, that it's very obvious to me that you've spent the time. And so what you just described, you're like, hey, I got to give it enough space and enough time to truly understand where the maker's coming from, which I think is so fantastic. I mean, it's obvious. It feels maybe obvious that that's what one would need to do. But I mean, I've had a few people send me pics, and I'm trying to think of what the name of the last guy that sent me pics. Oh, it's killing me. See, I should have this stuff figured out better. But the it was kind of small wooden, and they're stubby, and you know, they were probably for some sort of it might be in Gembico.
Well, he would definitely. I mean, Jörg Jörgen is his Jamabiko. He's a big lad for photographing things. I'm trying to think if it's stubby and it's wood, it could have been Woodo, or it could have been tree, or you know.
Let me grab them. They're right over here.
Please. Ah, that's what that was.
Let's see. At least I thought they were over here.
Oh, that's what I'm talking about. Fantastic.
Yeah, I can hear what you're saying now too. Yeah, you know, I feel I probably set them aside somewhere. They might be in another. I can't believe they would be in yet another box, not outside of these ones. But I digress. They're actually really well made, high quality little plectrums, but because I was maybe in a rush, you know, I was like, oh, this doesn't fit my thing, and I set them down. I kept going. I'm like, they're really cool, man. And he asked me like what you know what I thought, and I said, well, he sent me some other pics too that were more my speed, and I was like, these other ones I just don't know what to do with, because they're not. I'm not really vibing with it. But then I end up later on, I like they have to be here somewhere close. I'm like losing my mind, but they actually sounded really nice on acoustic guitar. They were kind of rounded, and they had like more of a kind of a rounded tip, which is just not, you know, like you said, I have to give some space to like understand the thing. Yeah. Otherwise I'm gonna miss it. So I appreciate that you put in the time.
The hardest thing is, and my position is a little bit weird in that sense, is that because the thing that everybody struggles with the pick thing, especially you don't get them in shops, like occasionally in the broad sense, that you get brands like Chicken Picks, V-Picks, Gravity are the most common boutique names or independent makers. You tend not to get other stuff in shops simply because a lot of these people make, or Dragon's Heart is the other one. But a lot of these people make very small numbers. From a retail perspective, it doesn't make sense to have them in. And the other thing, as you know with yourself, with the guitar trade, if you've got to explain what it is all the time, you're not going to sell it. Right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that's really interesting is that there's not a lot of people out there doing what I do, which is part of the reason I started doing it. I was just so surprised that it wasn't more of a thing. I need to try and be truly objective and find the good in things and be honest about the drawbacks, things like chirp and weight, and you know, if it doesn't work with your skin type or something, because you can't test these things. You're buying them remotely. When I did my first sort of adventure into this, when I ordered my first Gravities, which were my very first boutique picks, I had no idea, never played acrylic before, no idea what they were like. Obviously they're more money than the dollar or £1.20 you'd spend on normal picks.
Sure.
Even the Dunlop stuff, you're buying it in a bag for £6 and you get 12 in there. Even into the Ultics is way before prime tones and all that sort of thing. Is that if somebody wants to go and buy a Valley or a Dragon or a Honey Picks or anything like that, they have no frame of reference initially for how that's going to feel or sound or anything like that. So my whole ethos from the beginning was, I want to be excited because I'm excited about it. But I cannot let that override trying to explain to somebody what something is like, so that when it arrives, it is as close to that as possible, so that they get the thing and say, oh, he said it was a matte finish and it would stick to my hands if my hands were dry, or if, you know, it needs to be true, for want of a better term. So if I say, if somebody sends me pics and I go, this thing is rad, it's the best thing ever made, it's made out of the true cross and it'll open your garage door and everything, and it doesn't do that, then I've done the maker, the customer, and the community a disservice, because the pick being taken for granted for such a long time, despite its ubiquity in music, it's always got to fight its corner. It's like back in the day when I was growing up in the 90s, it was very common for guys with effects to have, you know, a Boss overdrive or a fancy overdrive, and then a whole load of MXR and Boss stuff, because that the boutique scene at the time was kind of that, right? It wasn't there wasn't the proliferation of your Earthquakers and Native Audios and, you know, old blood noise and demos that you get today. So a lot of people were very against the idea of fancy stuff, of, oh, it's just a waste of money, there's no difference, etc., etc. Now, that was 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Nowadays, it's totally normal for guys to like come out of the womb and go straight onto a Kemper with a Helix, and, you know, that's people just accept that. Obviously, not everybody accepts it, but the vast majority of people say, I don't mind having a color-coded, fully JHS-loaded board, because that's the way our culture's gone. With picks, rather, the fact that the boutique scene as it is today is nothing like the boutique pick scene that there was even 10 years ago, means that the pick is still in that place of people not saying, I need to have this, I need to upgrade to this. Now, I'm not, for all my action and my boutique stuff, I'm not a snob about this. I think that's the wrong way to look at it. It's the wrong way to look at guitars. It's the wrong way to look at effects. It's not what you used to get the sound, it's the sound you got in the end. Because everybody's got a different way of looking at it. You look at your boy, what's his name? Guitars from the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, whose name I can't remember. I watched his rig rundown. You know the guy I'm talking about anyway. But
I do, but I don't know his name.
And his the guy his tech says, this is the start of his sound, right? Here's his clean sound, and it's like, you know, and then it just gets more and more distorted and more aggressive from there. Now, if Herb Ellis rocks up to use his gear and goes, what am I going to do with this? Which one of them is wrong? Neither of them is wrong, because it doesn't work like that. And if he gets what he gets from, I remember talking to Aziz Ibrahim about this when he dropped in, well, as if we're like pals or something. He came into the shop I was working in London, and I was just getting into the pick thing. And I said to him, what do you use pick wise? Because I'm just interested. And he uses a Dunlop Tortex 351 half a mil. Okay. Super floppy, super thin. That really surprised me, because he grew up playing loads of shred. And I know Van Halen was a big guy for thin picks and everything. I don't use the copper pick and all that, but like he liked the thin pick thing. A lot of funk guys like the thin pick thing. But I was really surprised for somebody who has the attack that he has that used the thin pick. Now, I'm not against the thin stuff. I think that's fine. If that's what works for you, that's really all that counts. And all that heavy repping has ever really tried to do at a base level is say, you have these options here. It's worth considering. Doesn't mean it's not compulsory. The guitar world has this terrible, I know we talked about this before when you were on my thing, but the guitar world's got this really weird way of looking at it, of saying it's either one or the other. You know, you either go boutique or you go dirt cheap. There's no middle ground, and it's wrong. It's wrong to look at it that way. So, you know, I think if you can, I think the material thing is important. I think materials make a huge difference to sound, shape, and everything. And if those of you who are listening or watching, and you want to know just how much of a difference it makes, and you never tried this before, get your acoustic out, your cheap acoustic, your fancy acoustic, whatever. Get a totally ordinary store-bought pick, celluloid, whatever. Play with it that way around with the normal tip. Then turn it side on and play with the shoulder. You'll hear all your top end retreat and all your bottom end come out. That's how much difference a pick makes. Doesn't have to be something incredible. They'll help your, they'll help your play style or help your grip strength or whatever. But it's not, it's not the law. I'm not
Just
here
within,
to enforce the law.
Yeah, just within turning one cheap pick to the side, you can get a different tone.
Yeah,
it's amazing. Oh, speaking of, you mentioned the Holy Grail earlier, and I got some Herco here, man.
Oh, they're fab, man. Like I honestly, the Flex 75, what a bit of gear. Like they're really, it's what got me back onto these ones. Like you've got over there. Like I think these are super, super cool. They've got a bit of the old, I mean, they go back a long way, but the whole Grover Allman, like high shoulders, long taper sort of thing. But I think for acoustic playing, they're wicked. Taylor Thermix Ultra's wicked too. If you want to make if you want to get a really tiny acoustic, like a wee parlor, and it sounds a bit empty, because it's a small instrument.
Sure.
Really dense material, like thick celluloid or Thermix, really like it puts all the focus in. So you've got a small instrument that then sounds a little bit fuller without sounding quite as zingy. Because if you want to go zingy, just play with your fingers or play with your normal pick. But that sort of stuff just changes it fundamentally. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, it's interesting overall that like predominantly, you could probably speak to this at great length, but predominantly the artisan pick world is mostly focused in on the thicker picks, which for me emanates from the love and the cult of jazz 3. That's and the gypsy jazz, like, so the gypsy jazz type of vibe, and also like flat picking, like kind of folk flat picking. They use thicker picks. They tend to, but the majority of the world, because there's been so many, iconic songs written with a Herco or with a Tortex or with a whatever, right? I can see why people like, those expensive picks, like, like I'm just strumming 3 chords, right? So like the vast majority of players don't ever have to even think too far down the road with this, or to get their job done, what it is that they're aiming to do. But for the rest of us that are kind of interested in that, the player instrument interaction, and this is one of the primary points of intimacy that we have with that, with our instrument and with what it is that we're trying to express. And as you said before, it's like it's such a wonderful thing to have an array of kind of flavors at your behest, so that you can see how you might play the same thing a little differently with a different plectrum. So
I think it's one of the things that Brock from BHL put a cartoon up on Instagram the other day, and it's that one of all the, the 2 soldiers are standing there, the 2 Roman soldiers, saying, "How do we know if they're dead or not?" And he starts talking about 13. One of the guys talking about 13 mil picks, and all the bodies are like, Hendrix only had thin picks, 1 mil's too heavy. And the thing is that's the prevailing thought, right? I totally get that. I mean, the Plectroverse as a whole, the whole community is pretty aware of it, and they're aware of the sort of external view that the rest of the world, or the rest of the musical world, has of the pick. But I think it's one of the things, your man, to talk about that sort of stuff, your man Hendrix, he didn't use heavy picks, because up until, I mean, gypsy jazz is a whole other thing. So your boy Django Reinhardt was a big lad for your 3 mils and all that sort of stuff, and basically stuff like this is an EML, but if you look at the tip on that, see how blunt that is.
Oh yeah,
it almost looks like a normal pick that's just been worn down. The whole point of this is that is the gypsy style, because that whole musical and downstrokes, you don't have the drums. You listen to Stefan Grappelli, Django Reinhardt, Hot Club of France, you've got maybe snare kind of brushing in the background, but the guitar in that instance, on an arch top with flats and everything, the whole point of that is that's the rhythmic core. So if you've got a round pick, all your emphasis is on the bass. So you're playing all down strokes because you're trying to fulfill the role that the drums are having. And then when you're alternate picking, it's all about pump, 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 because playing a Machiavelli, you're not having a note that's going, you're going away for a bite and you're still hearing that. It's not like a big sort of note. It's all like bang, 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 bang all the time. So it's all about force. You get more force from that. But back then, I mean, seeing as we're actually on the video and I can show you this, the sort of picks that you had access to back in the day, and back in the day, I'm talking about your man Vinny at VPix. He started making stuff in about 1980, thereabouts, and in the early 80s. Epple Franken at Chicken Picks, similar sort of time. But the modern stuff that we look at now, I mean, your boy Jim Dunlop, he didn't standardize the Tortex series until 1981. Yeah, and that became the norm. So that was the Delrin thing. But before that, the sort of picks that you played, as a general rule, were things like this. This is a cork grip, patented cork grip, hand cut, hand beveled and everything. This is from the 1930s, right? So when you were playing back in the day, that's what you had. And that was considered pretty meaty. The super heavy stuff. I mean, back when celluloid was the norm, this is all, D'Andrea and all the way back in the beginning of the 20th century. The super heavy stuff was considered a whole millimeter. Can you imagine?
Whoa.
That thick? Jeez, like 2 sheets of construction paper on top of each other.
Golly gee.
So the thing that really blows my mind is you go back to like, they're in here somewhere, but there's the old French Duras from the 1930s. These things. Now, these are pretty rare, pretty thin on the ground, and I'm very fortunate to have the late Joe Macy, God rest him, who was a big collector in the US and knows way more about picks than I ever will. He sent me a couple of these. These are French Dura Harlequins from the 20s and 30s. Now, that material, this light. I'm telling you this right now. You can see these on my Instagram and everything, but the light doesn't do them justice. This is not a pattern thing. That's the material.
Oh, okay. So what is the material?
The material is it's a weird sort of rubber.
Oh.
There's a way.
Does it feel like rubber?
Picks with no, it kind of feels it's really springy. I don't want to bend them too much, but there's like no rigidity to that. So it's the equivalent of if you had like a 0.6 nylon, it sort of feels a bit like that.
Got it.
But back in the 30s, I can't imagine playing with it, not just from a collector's point of view, but in a practical sense. If you played the sort of stuff you do, for example, or in the heavier sort of sphere, that would last you maybe a couple of songs. And then all you would have is a very small disc of nothing. But you go back even further than that. That's a Bruno Wheatstraw from the early, that's a mandolin pick from like way, 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 way back. This is from the impressed era. This is the pre-print era. So this is when they were still pressing the names and not stamping them. So it's a whole other thing. So these are made from celluloid. That was your mandolin pick. But that back in the day, and in the 60s and stuff, you had your 351s. That was all your D'Andrea standardization in the 20s. But you didn't have the choice you've got now. So your boy Hendrix, who used normal picks, of course he did, because he didn't have a choice.
Right.
So that's not, it's like saying, oh, Hendrix only needed a fuzz face and and a Dallas Arbor or this. Of course he did, because he didn't have a choice. It wasn't like he could rock up and say, do you know what? Really not digging the sound of my plexi. Can we reprofile it into something else? Let's reamp a bunch of stuff through an AC30 and a VHT Pitbull. He didn't. It's not the same landscape. We can't judge the past by the present. It's true. It's impossible. It's not impossible, but we shouldn't do it.
Agreed. And also, it is. There is merit to the statement. Well, so and so only used such and such, right? And look at what they were able to create. So, I don't mind. I agree with your statement. At the same time, I'm like, hey, are we overcomplicating our current situation sometimes? Yes, definitely. Like we have so many options, right? Where, I have this fractal sitting here, and man, I love it, but I don't use it like a fractal. I use it like Like I got a bunch of amps and I just turn the dial. Oh, I like that amp. Cool. And I don't really turn the knobs much,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Because I won't get nothing done. If I go down into the
sure.
menu, I will do nothing but that day. And I hate doing that stuff personally. Some people get off on it. They love it. So, you know, and on one element, you know, there is something to be said. Well, you know, it's what did it take for some of the greatest things to be done? Well, there wasn't any options. And because there wasn't any options, those decisions were almost made for them.
Yeah.
Right.
It's the old necessity is the mother of invention thing. If you've got, we're living in a weird time now for equipment, because if you want to, I mean, I use the Harley Benton example, right? So Harley Benton, known throughout the guitar world as making cheap stuff, right? It's cheap stuff. Sure. It's not bad stuff. It's just cheap. Think about it this way. Not a month ago, we had secondhand Harley Benton in the shop that was an 8-string fan fret 9-piece body through neck for 400 quid. Now, if you think back, but irrespective of how well made it is, think back to the mid-90s and you approach a company and say, can you make me a fan fret 9-piece body, multi-wood laminate, you know, for that money? And they would say, no, we can't. That is absurd. Please go away. It's not feasible. Everything's changed. Everything's completely different now. I think if you have your Fractal or you have Kemper, which is a whole other conversation, a whole bunch of guys that I know from old London days who go out and tech with touring bands, the majority of them are switching, or a lot of them anyway, are switching to things like Kemper, because it means not having to take a twin and a backup twin and a spare twin and 2 plexis because they don't have to do that. If you want to go into the studio and you can still have a bunch of, like, you know, your Sound Cities or your Sonuses or whatever and just run them at full chat and everything. But in a real world application, you get things like your Fender Tone Master series. There's less sort of hatred for digital stuff. And like I said earlier on, you can get however you get where you're going to go. That's the only thing that counts. There's a thing that, what's his name? Guthrie, Robin Guthrie from the Cocteau Twins, and he was saying that he was a big lad for buying tons of gear, and he liked concocting his sounds and everything. He said they were on tour, I want to say in France, but it really doesn't matter to the story, but he was on tour and he had all of his kit at the airport, and it had been sent somewhere else, and he was here and the kit was there. And he's like, how am I going to do the gig? What am I going to do? So he borrows an amp, he borrows a guitar, a chorus and a delay, and a drive for the show. Not his gear, none of the stuff he spent years accumulating, setting up, practicing with, recording with, working in the studio with, finessing, detailing so that he gets exactly what he wants. He just got a bunch of crap that he's nicked off some guy and said, don't worry, I'll have it back to you, whatever. Goes and does the show. He says, I plugged all of it in, I still sound like me. Because the players, the core of what you're doing. I don't think there's one approach. I don't think there's one way of doing anything with music, which is why it's such, especially with the electric guitar, no rules to this. You know, you get your £100 Teisco with the neck pickup that doesn't work, and you jam it into your, you know, this Framus cab with a Hampstead head, or your, you know, whatever, your orange rocker head going into an old Engel cab, and you're playing jazz somehow. If that's how you get the sound, you know, the punters don't care. That's the big thing. It's like I was at a friend of mine's wedding a couple of years ago, and his band, not his band, but the band at the wedding, no amps. Literally nothing. HX Stomp for guitar, B7K Ultra for the bass, electric kit. I'm looking at them as a musician going, oh man, I can hear that he's changing patches. You know, it's like that's a this, and then it's a completely different amp sound. They've all got in-ears and they're standing there and they're doing the thing. And I'm thinking about, you know, the tonal, this, whatever. And then I look over from here to here, and I don't see a bunch of people stroking their beards and going, oh, you know, but if he's gonna run like that sort of echo on that, I see a dance floor full of people doing this. It's only
Right.
us it's only musicians who don't care about it.
Yeah, us cork sniffers are the ones that are concerned, you know.
Well, I don't think it's one of the things. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That always needs to exist. It's like the supercar.
Agreed.
We don't need that. We don't need a car that does 260 miles an hour on a road.
Nope.
For day-to-day road use. But it doesn't mean it shouldn't be made, because then we know it can be done. So it's, and somebody somewhere is very excited about that.
Yeah, I agree with it. I mean, there's always a bit of a halo effect by creating high-end, interesting super cars, super picks, super shoes, super guitars, super things, and somebody oftentimes, like in a commercial, capitalist type based society, that's a lot of times how things get developed. I mean, you look at least that's what it appears to be like with Elon Musk and Tesla, right? Like he's like, I'm going to go out there and build this crazy badass car that not everybody can really actually afford or apprehend. But if enough of you people that can afford it do buy it, then that's going to, infuse my next wave of creation, invention, and eventually I'll get it to the $30,000, $40,000 range for that. Consider what he considers to be an average person, and here we are, though, that like the Teslas are really popular and they are within the average family's pay range roughly now. If you want to go that route, you can get in line and get one. Sure. That's why like a lot of times, like the companies I've worked for through the years, they love it when an artist is like, hey, make me something special. And they're like, like, for example, like James Hetfield wanted a set of pickups at EMG, right? And so Rob Turner said, all right, yeah, of course. I mean, it's Hetfield, Papa Het, let's do it, And so he goes he's like, okay, here, like this. And he's like, a little, and it's like, he had to do that like 20 times. I'm not kidding you. Like 20 different iterations of winding pickups and calculating tonality, and finally, and you hit like number 21. It's like, dude, that's it, and at that point, a good thing it's with somebody like James Hetfield, who is going to sell pickups and you are going to recoup. But not all companies get to recoup in that way. Sometimes they do that and will do that experiment, like, this is R&D, it's I'm researching and develop. Even if this doesn't fully work out with this person, hopefully it leads to something else that does kind of spark some new invention or some new way of putting it out, and then it would all be worth it at that point.
Yeah. Well, we don't know. I mean, no. Okay. We don't know when something's going to come along that's going to change stuff. I think that's quite, in some ways, that's quite exciting, because there's a great, these trends that come and go, and people not knowing, when Fractal and Axe Effects, we were talking about them earlier on, when that stuff came along, going back even further, when the Line 6 pod came along, there's no way that people would have predicted it was derided. And this is coming out in the era where your minimum backline rig was a 50-watt head and a 500-watt car, and like that was what, and maybe a JC 120, and that was in every rehearsal room I was in Scotland back then. The pod came out, all of a sudden everyone's doing their guide tracks with that in the studio, and that became the norm. It wasn't, people weren't necessarily going out and swapping their whole boards for that, but it crept and it crept in. And now you're going out on stage and saying, right, hi everyone, we're the Offspring. All of our tones are set on a clock to make sure that when we finish this song, it switches to this, or we've got a backup Kemper, and all of our sounds are on this USB stick. I mean, it's just a punk band like the Offspring, for whatever you think of them, coming from that scene, to have that and say, yeah, of course we do that. It's way easier.
No, it is weird. It is weird, but I mean, from a touring, and freight standpoint, I've watched loads of bands give up their beloved backline, and partially because of sound guys and how they want to run the sound and everything. But I remember when it really first started creeping in for me was when I was doing custom rigs for both Geezer Butler of Black Sabbath and of Mike Inez of Alice in Chains back at Ampeg. We were doing specific cabinets for each one of them. Both of them really love single 18s, a row of single 18s underneath an 810, right? And they both would run like SVT. No, but hey, but look at when you're talking about Black Sabbath, then it's all okay. Because
for sure.
the difference, especially with a band like that, even to the last few shows, they don't run in-ears. They're still running like the OG days. They just turn it up louder. They got some monitors in front of them, but like the stage volume is real volume, and they run all those cabinets. They're not I take that back. Tony Iommi doesn't run all of his cabinets, but Geezer ran most all of his cabinets. If you saw a wall of cabinets behind him, those were live cabinets. So that's
pretty saucy.
Yeah,
he's not.
But,
Yeah,
and then Mike would model his tone after Geezer and switch it up a little bit, and then but in the process of Mike getting a new setup that was kind of Geezer-esque, the band was like, we actually want to hide your amps off the stage, and we want to have a clean set, and we want to have all these lights, and we want you to have in-ears. And he's just like, he was just cussing so hard about it's like, I can't fuck what, this isn't rock and roll anymore, playing around with it, but ultimately it because one world was dying as another world is emerging, and now it's like it's you only a few bands, like maybe AC/DC probably is one of the few bands that will travel with their own sound system, all live amps, all live their own amp tech that's like got new old stock tubes ready to go back in their thing. They spent
man. Like seeing his backline run on your Premier Guitar Boys, and he's like, so these are the amps, and it was said with this tone of like, I mean, that's how he gets it. But we've got a guy at the back who just sits and like swaps tubes out like all day. But I mean, all day. That's the thing. There's a physicality to certain styles. So if you went and saw, let's use a ridiculous example. Let's say you go and see Sun, right? Or you go and see Bongzilla, or you go and see like Electric Wizard, or any of the Doom bands, and you rock up and there's no amps on stage, one would feel a touch cheated if that were the case, because part 100%. Of that, it's like, I'm going to go and see Sleep, I'm going to go and see and he's, I've heard about this wall of this wall of orange and matte amp and custom matte amps and everything, and then he rocks up and there's no backline, there's just Al Cisneros plonking away and the drums. It's part and parcel of that dynamic. I wouldn't expect, if I went to see BTS, which I'm not slagging, or Blackpink or anything like that, and I wouldn't expect them to have a row of Marshalls at the back, because they're not that sort of band. But if I went to see, Firebird or Witchcraft or something, I'd expect to see a big tall row of Marshalls and coily cables and all that sort of stuff, because it's part of it. And all of that theater that engages the audience, because they've gone to see that sort of stuff. And I that's really, I don't think that sort of mentality won't die. But again, you're not talking about, you're moving out of mainstream and into a more, as much as these bands are known, they're still not, you're not going to get Sun for 2 nights at Wembley Arena. It's just not. Maybe you will. Right. I'd go and see that. Maybe, maybe not after the second time, because that was a bit much. That was with Earth, and I lost two days of no hearing. Nothing.
Oh my God.
Absolutely. It's stupid. Like,
where's your earplugs, bro?
That was with plugs in.
Oh.
Yeah, I got vaporized, because the problem is you go and see a band, right? Like you do, and you've got a venue that's long, and you've got a stage at the end, and then you got a big long tube, and the sound goes like this, right? But the second time I went to see them, it's still a long room, and it's still got a stage, but it's not here. It's here at the side. So the sound's just going, like the whole way up and down the wall. There was no getting away from it. They were so loud. I'd seen them before as well in an old church, and I was like, okay, this is pretty loud, but it's like a warm loud. Like a kind of, I'm wading through this huge pile of loud marshmallows. And the second time it was just excruciating. The sound went up and it just didn't end. And it kept going and it kept going. And I thought, oh man. And then, coming out of the venue and just it wasn't like it was just like a dial tone for 2 days. I was working in a call center at the time, and I was just phoned up and said, I can't come in. I can't hear anything. Bye. Hung up the phone because I can't people shouting at me. Anyway, ridiculous.
So this raises a whole nother topic that that like just because you can put a stage in a room doesn't mean you should. We don't need more venues. We need better venues in the world. It's one of my biggest pet peeves because I feel like I've been to probably 1,000 or more shows. I don't know. I've done so many shows in the last decade and a half that I've been in this business, and I was just like a fiend for shows as a young person. I didn't care who was playing. It's like, put me out there. I want to be in the crowd. And after all these years of going to shows, especially the indoor shows, I'm just like, I think about 70% of the venues are kind of crap. Like 70%. Like, it's like, okay, they got a bar. Oh, well, we'll put a stage in the corner over there, or put a stage over there, and nobody they do all this work to hang speakers, to build a stage, to do all the things, make sure you got access to the bathroom, but nobody treats the room. Nobody.
No.
Nobody.
Just like howling
almost
into
nobody.
a bucket. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing is we always forget about. We got this problem here in Exeter. Sorry, Exeter. I've been here a long time, but come on. So let's say, for example, forget about the fact that you might be a folk duo. Let's talk about young people in bands, right? Mm-hmm. So you're a young band coming up. You want to play stuff that's kind of a bit too loud and a bit too trashy. It doesn't matter if you're playing heavy stuff, punk, hardcore, indie, whatever. You need a venue that's suitable for that. And most importantly, you need a venue that is the right size for that. So down here, we've got the Phoenix, which is a great place. That's where I did my radio show before. It's too big for a local band. Physically, it's too big for a local band. The Cavern, which is the place that you go and play, shouts the Cavern, hello. That's the right size. But that's where you go. There is no other choices if you play that sort of stuff, because
I see.
The scene is any scene in any town is fed by having a small place. You look at what the punk scene was like in Orange County, and it was people playing, ballrooms and halls and community halls and all that sort of stuff. And those places are right because they're not too big. They're small enough so that if you get 50 of your pals in, it doesn't look like you're looking at an empty amphitheater, because there's nothing more deflating. You've done it yourself, I'm sure. But you go and do a gig and you're like, I can see all the way to the door. And that's a little bit deflating. It doesn't matter how early or late in the game you are. So having it like, a little bit more, I agree with you. I think there should be more venues that are better, but they need to be better suited to the sort of music they're putting on. I would expect an underground venue to have a bit of a sticky floor. Yeah,
exactly. And I mean, when I was out touring with my band, the places we played are ridiculous. I mean, talk about seeing the front door from the stage. Sometimes you were right across from the front door because the place was so small and the stage barely even couldn't even fit our drum kit on it.
Yeah,
and
I've done a couple of them.
By the time we're playing thrash metal to a bunch of drunken homies, half of us are on top of the bar and we're in the mosh pit with our guitars, that's just how it works out. But
it's nuts, isn't it?
It absolutely is. But I yearn for a time or a place and where I would see more venues, more, because when somebody really creates a theater type spot that has good visibility for everybody that comes to a show, and they think about, let's tier it up in this certain way so that you can be standing anywhere in this cove and not only see it, but also make sure that the coverage of the audio is good. And some of the best venues are when that you have a really good sound person, but you also don't need to turn up. Like a lot of venues, because of the reverberation, it causes the classic problem of like, I just got to turn up more so that I can hear myself, but you're making everything worse. You're making the basketball bounce, in a worse situation. So then now we're at a place where it's like, okay, well, it's actually better if you bring your fractal or your Kemper and you don't have any stage volume and just let the sound guy do it in ears, because you're going to at least only be dealing with one sound force that's really like bouncing around in there versus 2 or 3, So
it's like saying, I just want to, on stage, you want not, I am an old man, really.
I am too. Okay.
But at the same time, in a practical sense, if you want to have a good show and you want to be able to hear each other, it's all cool to and banging stuff out. I did it. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. That's why when somebody talks to me in the shop and we've got the air conditioning on, I have to cut my ear and lean in to hear their phone number. But you don't wear plugs when you're a kid. But really, in a practical sense, what you want is enough volume out the amps to get over the drums, and just leave the guy front of house to deal with it. Say hello to the guy who's doing your front of house. Hi, my name is such and such. We've got 2 vocals in this tonight. Can you make sure that we have X? Every sound guy is different. Every room's different. Every PA is different. Every desk is different. Just give the guy a bit of time. He's in there 7 nights a week dealing with you and people like you of varying degrees of intelligence and ability. He just wants a bit of peace and to be able to do a good sound mix, because that's actually his job. But yeah, I mean, the whole music thing is, I don't know. We all do it. We keep coming back to this lawless, financially ruinous, emotionally draining, soul-crushing experience, because for those 30 minutes, and I know it's an old trope, but for that, you do a good gig and you're like, God damn, that was amazing. It was worth the last 15 years. And it's a
100%. Like I still think about, I mean, there's out of the, I don't know, 100 shows or something my band played, probably over 7 years or something. We didn't gig super hard, but hard enough. And but there was probably 10 to 15 of those gigs that were just outstanding. Like that carried the weight for all the rest, the other 70, 80 gigs, that you were just like, you're like burning through all these, well, this one, we all broke strings. We couldn't even finish through the 3rd song very well. And then whatever, everything happened, but then there was 10 or 15, maybe even 20 gigs out of 100 that just hit on some level. Everybody was in the front, rocking out and being a part of the show. And that, the interaction, you felt received. And then, and that would just make you get done with a gig like that. And you just kind of you could bask in the glow of that for a month or 2. I mean, I know I could.
You sit in your mate's car and listen back to I remember sitting in I remember being like 22, I think, or 21. We'd done a gig at King Tut's in Glasgow, and I remember we recorded it onto minidisc, so that gives you an idea of the time period. The era. Recording it onto minidisc and not having a stereo to play it on in my mate's house, so we had to sit in the car and listen to it for half an hour, through the stereo. This terrible recording from this venue on this tiny little thing in the car. With one of the tape headphone converter things, and you're like, oh man, listen to that. And do you remember? And you can see it in your head. Do you remember? Oh, I did that thing, and you jumped off that thing, and it's like, it's daft and wonderful all at the same time, and it's a great thing. But anyway,
you'll never get paid back for all that time. You never. It's one of those things you definitely do it for the love of it.
It's a compulsion.
Switching gear. Yes. Switching gears a little bit back to I wish I could remember the name that this pick was modeled after, and I don't know if I've told you this story or not, but when I was at Dunlop, Jimmy said one day, said, hey, we've been working on some picks for Peter Frampton. And I said, oh, okay, cool. He says he has these old picks that he loves, these 2 different old picks, and it's killing me. It's bumming me out that I don't remember what the picks were, but he had given their vintage picks, and he'd given them to Jimmy to recreate. So he was gonna scan, and we're gonna go back and make him some so that he could put these in the case, right?
Sure,
and then go back and play with the picks. And one of them we recreated, no problem. And then the other one just went missing. Like all of a sudden, and Jimmy for a little while was like, hey, I don't want to talk to Peter Frampton, until we find this pick. Like, I don't know what. So you
Hello,
run interference.
Tell him I'm not here.
No, but I mean, he was Frampton. Like, he was genuinely like, he was so bummed. He was like, I can't believe I would let, like just the classic thing. You're like, I can't believe that Peter Frampton would hand me some picks and I wouldn't know where one of them was, and but I kept going, I kept him busy. I kept, was texting with Peter and was like, hey, like, so you want your name on this, right? Like, where are we going to put the name at it and stuff? Like, let's figure this pick out and then we'll get to the other one, and then like kind of kept delaying and it worked out. But then for like, I don't know, 6 months, 8 months, the whole place was turning the office upside down regularly. Find this pick. Pick. Can't believe we lost this pick. And little did we know or remember, somebody had handed it to one of our graphic designers and he had set it down on his desk and he'd just been sitting next to his computer, but unbeknownst to him, he wasn't aware, didn't notice that the whole place was looking for this pick. It was sitting on his desk right there, like just in plain sight, like no problem. And finally, it was literally like probably 5 or 6 months of just like being super anxious about it. And then and dude was like, oh, you guys were looking for this? And he like, and we're all like, oh God, like how the hell? So it was kind of funny to tell Peter later, hey, we lost your pick, but we found your pick. but we found your pick. Action.
Oh man.
But I don't know if you can see this, but it's kind of a soft, like Jazz 3-ish looking thing.
That looks a lot like, bear with me, consult my index.
Yeah.
It looks a lot like a 348.5A, which is from the 1947 D'Andrea catalogue.
Oh, D'Andrea, huh?
Your boy. It's weird doing it on camera. Here. Yeah, well, this one.
It does look close to that.
Yeah.
But it's a little less teardroppy, I think.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of permutations of those around that time.
Okay.
Without having the dimensions, it might be a 352.5. But those, all that stuff. If you ever get a hold of this, kids, Will Hoover's Picks, one of the only couple of books on picks. This is the original copy with the pick inside, still inside the cover.
Oh, sick!
Very chuffed to get. I'm doing an audiobook version of this, in case you guys aren't sick of listening to me talk already.
Are you? You're reading that book? You're going to do an audiobook?
I'm on my final. I'm on the final chapter, which is going to take me about 1 billion years to edit because audiobooks is not as fun as I thought it was going to be. I like reading stuff out, but editing it and editing things like, I've got a podcast going up tonight with tomorrow night with Rick and Andrew from Honey Picks and Apple City Hobbies, which is around the sort of hour mark. Two lovely Carolina. Those wonderful voices from there. It's this because you don't we kind of take that for granted a bit over here, but actually they're lovely gentlemen. But editing podcasts and editing audiobooks is the most heinous thing because it's not like video where you've got 5 minutes and it takes you an hour and a half to shoot it, and then you end up with this 5-minute thing that takes you another 4 hours to make. With podcasts, it's saying I've got 2 hours of recorded talking. I know, and obviously when you're dealing especially when you're dealing, as we are right now, talking across the vast oceans on the internet, you end up with all this lag. So you got a question, and then you got 15 seconds of nothing, and then somebody going laughing at the joke that happened 15 seconds ago, because that's the but yeah, it's just one of the things. But they we were talking about like the origins of certain shapes and everything, and it's funny you mentioned about the Jazz 3 thing and the whole cult of the cult of the Jazz 3, as Bonamassa referred to it. And it's the pick that's got more. I know people do tour picks and stuff, where you have, you've got your things like this one that says strap tight. Not sure where that came from, but that, that's your promotional 351, your classic thing, and you put your band's name on it and all that. But people who've actually got signature models, people like your Petrucci's, I know Petrucci's got a whole bunch of them, with Dunlop, or Matt Heafy or Eric Johnson or any of these people. So many of them come from the Jazz 3, and they're derived from the Jazz 3. And in the pick game, it's a little bit like anything, in the sense that in the pedal world, you've got your Tube Screamer, you've got your clone, you've got your like Rats and Muff clones and everything. And the pick community is not that different, really. A lot of stuff is divined. That's not correct. Sure, divined. Why not? From the 351, the Jazz 3, the Jazz XL. The most common ones are the Jazz 3 and the Jazz XL. And also the 346, which is your big triangle lad. And then you end up with stuff like that, which is the Arcadian Barbarian, which is a big, hefty, jobby. But
that's a cool looking pick.
These are made here in Exeter.
Oh, really?
By an old friend of mine, Nads from Arcanum. He makes all this sort of stuff.
Okay.
These are beautiful things. He actually he makes body casts for the NHS. But yeah, that's one of them there. That's a cleric. Very cool.
Yeah. Very cool.
His work is incredible. He has a shed. He has a bigger shed now, but when he originally started making, a little bit of background information for you here, kids. When Nad started making picks, he didn't have a laser. He was doing it all by hand with a hacksaw and a bandsaw. So you get a blank sheet of A4 sheet of acrylic, and go into his shed, where the shed would accommodate the bandsaw, and that was it. And he would stand outside the shed and put the sheet in and cut it like this.
Wow.
And then take out this sort of rough blank, and then go inside, and he would cut it, and then he would sand it using loads of different grades of sandpaper. And he had a steel rod with high grit sandpaper wrapped around the top, and he cut with that in his front room, shaping the top of it with this steel rod, and then buffing the edges with like different grades of sandpaper. It's crazy. But all those guys, they have to get their inspiration from somewhere. And the funny thing is that your man Nick Lucas, who is one of the first artists to have his name on a pick, which I've got in here somewhere. Oh yeah, there's one for you, seeing as you're a man of culture. There's Parappa the Rapper.
Whoa, that's awesome.
This is a limited. They did a limited run of these in Japan, and I was able to get hold of one. They did 6 different varieties, and I got hold of one of them. And super cool. But they all had to take their inspiration from somewhere. And although the 351 is kind of the most ubiquitous in the real world, your Dunlop yellows and greens, the Jazz XL and the Jazz 3 are proliferate in the boutique scene. But it's interesting to see how far people push the form. That's one of the things that's really cool. So when your boy Tom Winspear, he of the Gent and Tech fame, who makes these like the Shiv, which are tapered from the top down like that.
Those are interesting picks.
These are, if you're playing like what we refer to in the UK as cow chasing, because you're going cow on your next string.
Cow chasing,
cow. Hard cow action, cow. He's a 9-string fanfret guy, so he makes these, and they're great for that. But he takes his inspiration from Jazz 3, because of course you
Sure.
would. And it's interesting to see, I've tested the majority of those signatures. The Abassi one, Heafy. The Heafy one I really like, because I'm not a big Jazz 3 guy. They're a bit small for me. I grew up playing like the 500 series 0.71, which is the sort of powdery pink one. And then later it was the XL, the Altex XL, the yellow ghost, all like super hard and stuff.
Yellow
and then
ghost.
I found, the thing is, our scene is very weird in that it doesn't have, the guitar scene as a whole has lots of history. People are perfectly happy to spend, I've seen TED Talks of people talking about, right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my TED Talk. Tonight I'm going to be talking about the opening chord from A Hard Day's Night and how I broke that down from the original masters. 45 minutes of that. Like, it's, that's cool that you figured it out and everything. But at the same time, because the pick scene kind of gets taken for granted a bit, and I understand why,
Sure.
it means that all of the history and all of the lineage and the terminology and stuff, we've had to, the term Plectroverse wasn't around before I started doing this. We didn't have a name for it because everybody wasn't, consolidating in a community. And it's really interesting to, like, the more I've gone on as a modern collector, the more I've gone on and learned about old stuff, the more I start to realize just how much I don't know about, I've been a guitarist for 25 years. I worked in shops for guitar shops for 15 of that, and played, like you, hundreds of shows in different bands and different styles on different instruments and everything, because that's the life of a musician.
Sure.
But the more you get in, when you get into any niche subject and you start to try and learn about that, and you try and learn about the history of where your thing came from, there's so little information out there. There's earlier on, the Will Hoover one. There's that, and there's a book by Brian Bouchard called Guitar Picks of Rock and Roll, which I believe is coming up for, there's a new iteration of it coming out, which is all about stage thrown. It's like, it's picks from bands, not the history of picks as a whole. Those are our only two books for the whole
kind
scene.
That's not very much, right?
No, absolutely not.
But that second book that you're talking about there, I'm gonna have to pick up a copy of that. That sounds like right up my alley, just in the sense that it's like what in a weird way, what this podcast was kind of based on was the player's pick, like what, and the whole reason why I even ever cared at all about like getting a pick from somebody is because Dimebag gave me a small smattering of his picks, back in '94, and
that's very cool.
And then I started, that was my first big show, and then every time I went to a show, I was sitting there watching, and when a player would throw the pick, I was like, oh, I see what's going on here. It's like, all right, now that's the thing that I have to try to position myself in the crowd to be not too far out and not too close, because they'll throw it over my head. I'm trying to find the where can I be just right to like get a keepsake,
Well, it might interest you to know then, seeing as we were talking about this, that the vintage scene and the collecting scene for picks as a whole, right? There's always going to have been somebody somewhere going, oh, I've managed to get my hands on, a 1920 D'Andrea 347 or something like that. But the collecting scene as it is, with your boy, like your Plectrum Spectrum thing that you've got behind you, people like Jeff White and Brian and Tina and all that sort of stuff. That scene didn't really start until the early 80s. And really, it didn't start in earnest until 2000, when there was more of a consolidation of collectors worldwide. Because back in the day, whereas now we've got some fantastic groups on Facebook, like Everything Guitar Picks and non-branded, non-celebrity picks, which is just for people who collect stuff. Before that, there was a site called, well, originally it was actually a newsletter that went out called Pick Collectors Quarterly, and it came out 4 times a year, and it was circulated amongst the vintage community. People used to put ads in the back of music magazines and papers saying, if you get any picks, I want them, basically. And there was a couple of guys that are mentioned in Will Hoover's book who are pictured with it's almost like something out of the Old West, that they're standing there with this frame with all their picks in it. And those guys, what they used to do, the earliest approach to it, and this is still going on today in some circles, but the earliest approach to it was they would get their own picks made with their name on, or they would send, even going back even further than that, they would send a self-addressed envelope to an artist and say, listen, if you got any spare picks, here's an envelope with my address on. I would love to have them in my collection. It would mean a lot to me. It's amazing now. Like Zoe Pastor, who's a big music lover in the US. I interviewed Zoe ages ago. It was a fantastic read. Zoe goes to tons and tons of gigs, and her thing was to take. She got her own picks made with Zoe the Pick written on the front, and Spider-Man's face, or the Thanos glove, like the Infinity Gauntlet on it and stuff. And
hell yeah,
the whole thing was to go to the gig and get to go backstage to meet the artist, on the basis that if they were going to ask for a pick from that person, they would have one to give in return. And
dude, I love that. Yeah.
So that sort of thing, and that devotion to what is in a way a rather sort of, it's very charming, slightly archaic, almost, barter thing of saying, what you have for me is of tremendous value, and I want to make sure that you understand by me giving you this, that I'm presenting you with something that is of value to me because of what you've done or who you are and all that sort of stuff. And those guys in that scene is so different from the modern scene, where we're buying, I'll make sure that if any new Killing Onus ones or any new Stone Age and all that sort of stuff comes out, that I make sure I get my hands on it. Or if somebody's done a thing that they're not super happy with, if you're a maker out there and you know who you are, because I was talking to you last night, James from Northern Ghost, if you make a pick that you're not 100% happy with, and you're not happy with the prototype, I want it, because I want to track the origins. I want to say, this is where we came from, and share that with people, because it's not the finished product sometimes that's the most exciting. It's the thing that it inspires, and the thing that inspires it. You look at Les Paul's log, if you found that in a charity shop, if you found half an arch top in a charity shop with a railway sleeper in the middle, you'd think, this was made by a madman. But you fast forward 50 years, there's probably players out there who don't even know he was a guy. They just
no. I'm pretty sure.
So
it's the case.
Also, just as a wee thing, really early Dunlop print.
Oh, nice.
That's like 83, I think, that one. So
you
can see like all the print is off to one side.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't done very well.
Yeah, no, the early ones, they're kind of all over the place.
But that was sent to me by your man, Frederick at Picks of the Past. And if you're not following Picks of the Past, you're mad.
Oh, yeah.
He does the heavy business.
Here, just so you can see, this is what I got in this one. It's a Black Sabbath set from the very last Black Sabbath show in Birmingham.
Oh, rad.
2017. I did all the
nice.
I did all these. Most of them are actually for Geezer to throw out, and the couple in the middle are Tony Iommi's. But Geezer's tech always like to have like make funny stuff, and so
I love
Geezer's actually
cats. That's rad.
Yeah. Oh, it says okay then bye, with the little cat, and then you got the back here. It's got
it's a Dalek.
British robot thing, yeah, Dalek, and then it's got the date 2017 Birmingham.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
That's really cool.
Super fun. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, actually, two things. Okay, so I have two primary questions that I've been meaning to bring up. One of them is, since we were just on the pick throwing thing and getting picks from artists, do you have any inclination as to when or where or who might have started throwing picks into the crowd?
Oh wow! I mean, that's got to be your earliest guys to have signature plectrums, or rather, let's say artist plectrums, not necessarily signature ones. Was people like Nick Lucas, back in it's the early 20th century. I think the pick throwing thing into the crowd, I would operate on the basis that the most likely candidate for that is probably around about the sort of 50s and 60s, because that's when you're getting into the rock and roll era, especially in the 1950s and stuff. Because prior to that, and it's worth remembering, music was much, much, much different in terms of performance than it is now. So you see these, you see these videos of like Elvis. Elvis stands up in the comeback special in his leather gear. Elvis, I'll put a little strap on this and then I'll stand up here. And he's sitting down. He stands up and the crowd goes absolutely bananas, because that was what it was like back then. It wasn't like, if you had Rammstein come out, as a hyperbolic example, if Rammstein had done a regular club gig, with Matey coming out covered in dildos with everything on fire, then people would have been like, right, that's it. We're going to shut the world. We need to start again.
Set it all on fire.
These things need to progress to get to a certain place. So I would say I'll do a bit of research into this for you, I promise. But okay. I would take it back to, I would say it would probably go with like wilder public performances. So once you cross the Jerry Lee Lewis threshold, and like post Bill Haley and all that sort of stuff, when the real rock and roll thing kicked off, and then into the punk scene and everything, I'd say that's got to be that's very, very likely for that period of time, I'd say. Because people have got picks from back then,
Yeah, it sounds reasonable, but I also, in my mind, I thought, because I just genuinely don't know, right? And I genuinely don't really have any information for it. But like, I thought, well, okay, so Dunlop started probably mass producing picks with people's name. I know that DeAndrea and a few other companies did, picks with people's names on them and stuff, like in the celluloid and whatever else was available back then. But I kept thinking that, well, even in the 60s and 70s, I assumed that the picks were kind of probably too much of a commodity for the artist themselves, that they might not toss them unless they were just really, feeling full of themselves, and they're like, yeah, baby. But I thought, well, it must have been in the early 80s, and then thinking about like thrash metal and like the speed metal, like the Yngwie Malmsteens, and then like the Motley Crues, and like people that were kind of the 80s shred, and they're like they had more of the gunslinger feel, like I thought, oh, that's the guys that are snapping them into the crowd, because that's. But I don't know if it happened before then, I think
it would have. I mean, I would have assumed, based on the information I've seen of people collecting picks from the 70s and before, I think there was some proliferation of that. But I mean, it comes back to this, like you say quite rightly, in the early days of picks, when they were still being made out of tortoiseshell and all that sort of thing, you would never do that, because they weren't. They weren't something that was being mass produced. But as soon as you get into standardization and of pick shapes, particularly in the adoption of celluloid as a primary material, so we're into the sort of 1910, 1920s. 22, generally speaking, 22 is the time period when, or the year when, D'Andrea did the standardization of things. So your shapes like the 351s and 346s and all that sort of stuff, but being cut with a hammer die, so that anybody who's interested, and I'm sure you are if you're this deep in this, the shapes that we've got, we were talking about earlier on in that catalog, all of the numbers, like that being a 351 shape, your classic. That's a Thorpe one. Shout outs to Thorpe, fantastic. But your shapes that people have got and the nomenclature that goes with that, with all the numbers 355s and so on, that those numbers come from the number of the hammer die that was used to cut the pick. That's all it is. It wasn't some fancy thing. There was a thing, and I wish I had been there for this in hindsight. Obviously, I wasn't into, I wasn't that deep in the game back then. But there is and has been at guitar shows in the past, people from D'Andrea bringing along the original 351 hammer die that was used to cut those picks back then, which in our game is like, the Ark of the Covenant. So that's as holy as it gets. That's the origin of where we are. And as soon as those things became commonplace, then it's hard to get our heads around nowadays with the proliferation of plastic and everything that we have. I've got guys in the game like Plectrum who make those picks are injection molded from a plant polymer, so they're vegan and biodegradable, which is an insane thing and not expensive. They're like $2 a pick instead of $1.20 a pick, which is just like
that's super cool.
But
how thin do those Plectrum picks get?
About mil and a half, thereabouts.
Okay.
He does
cool.
He does a Jazz 3 now called the Raz 3, and he's got a 346 shape called the Tron, which is about 3 millimeters, but that comes in extra resilient. Great name for material, Tibor. Extra resilient and super eco. Super eco stuff is, I would say, consistency wise, is on a par with Delrin, but it's a lot harder. It's much harder hitting. He's another like quite heavy player. But before we adopted celluloid, which came out of a whole accident of this guy having a cast that he was trying to make. I can't remember his name for the life of me. He was trying to come up with a way of making billiard balls that didn't involve elephant ivory, because that was getting kind of rare and a bit expensive. And he tried to make this stuff out of formaldehyde and this material that was used for binding arm casts and stuff in the Civil War era, like gun cotton and all that sort of thing. He's trying to make billiard balls, and then he ended up trying to make them out of, he accidentally created celluloid, which then they tried to make billiard balls out of, but then when you knocked them together, they would explode and all that sort of thing. Because celluloid, just in case those of you who are not aware of this, celluloid is an incredibly volatile material, and rather prone to exploding. And also, if it's left in an airless space, it will constantly seek moisture and rot. And as somebody who has accidentally left older celluloid picks, I'm not going to say from which time period because it makes me upset, but I left a couple of picks. No, they're fine. They're fine now. I managed to clean them. But I left them in wrapping, which I shouldn't have done. And that you cannot get that smell out of anything. It permeated like all the toolboxes that I have. This is just a bunch of vintage stuff. But all the toolboxes I have stank. They stank of that camphor, like it's like the smell of bins, but like a sweet bin smell, and it got into everything. But before that, you were talking picks were made of tortoiseshell and that sort of stuff. And then when celluloid came around, and this is a much broader thing, but it ended up becoming adopted as a material that would allow people who couldn't afford super fancy stuff to have stuff that looked like super fancy stuff, but it was made of plastic instead of being made of wood. So people were getting pens made from celluloid and combs made from celluloid instead of made out of horn. They were having, tabletops made out of it instead of having wood, that sort of stuff. And because it was so easy to make and it was cheap, it was cheap in terms of mass production. That's how it became adopted for picks. So
sideline question about celluloid and Django Reinhardt. Were the picks that Django played early on, were they made of celluloid? Because I know that wasn't his accident that fused his fingers together because of celluloid flowers that caught on fire and then burned him up?
I can't remember the details of that. I wouldn't pretend to know that I did. I know it was a fire, and I know that he damaged. I've talked to a colleague of mine who is a very jazz conscious player about this, and the old story goes that he was missing 2 fingers in this hand. Now, I don't think that's 100% the case, but he had the thumb for sure. He had the thumb, index, and middle finger, and I think these 2 were kind of not in an Iommi way, but I think he kind of lost a little bit. He lost the mobility in them, and they became very stiff. So if you watch the little bit of footage of him playing, which is pretty terrifying, really.
Yeah, no,
he's doing all incredible. That and keeping up that sort of
2 fingers
jovial swing the whole time with 2 fingers, and then he's playing his bass drums with going thumb over, which, if you've ever done that on a Machiavelli, is like saying, "Oh, I need to cross the street, so I'm going to build this bridge in real time." It's so physically hard to do that because the strings are like pig iron and they've got no sustain. But yeah, I mean, I think the back in the day, the most accepted material for a lot of jazz players was things like horn, and horns are weird material. That's a Valley Picks horn one. Horn sounds wicked, but it wears quite quickly, and you can't. I mean, I'm a big guy for natural picks. I think that's a really important way to go. From a sustainability point of view, and also from a longevity point of view. But
sure,
there's some tough stuff out there. You ever get your hands on any moose crown?
No.
Moose crown is that I've got moose crown there. I've got some mammoth ivory and mammoth molar. There's a weirdly large amount of that out there in the scene. Dragon Picks does mammoth molar. That's pretty cool. So
I've got some abalone.
Abalone is very, very beautiful. Gemstone Picks do a bunch of that, and Shell Picks.
I think this is Gemstone Picks, actually.
Yeah, it looks like his shape, actually, the way he cuts them.
Yeah, and I love that these ones he cuts, and it's like to the natural bow of the thing, so you can have a place to put your thumb. It feels nice and comfy.
That's a very common thing with the jazz approach with companies like Dugan. Do things like that.
And the coconut shell,
coconut shell's wicked.
That's actually
really powerful material.
Really cool pick.
Yeah,
I actually really dig this one a lot. I like the kind of the scratchiness of the inside. I don't know. I just like the material feels good. But yeah, I've got a couple of natural picks for sure. I'm trying to remember. I think this is Gemstone Picks, or is this? I don't know, but it's the 33 million year old fossilized chrysanthemum. That
looks like a Stone Age to me.
Yeah, Stone Age.
The way he's beveled it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Matt makes some. Yeah, that's. I look at that tip, man. That's definitely Matt. I feel that's what it is there. He that's one of my favorite ones of his. He sent me this one ages. This is an ancient one, which is I got this about 2.5-3 years ago. This is the Pink Gin, which is not. It's still an early one of his, but I use this all the time. I think it's fab. Stone Picks is wicked for a lot of tech metal guys use them because the note separation is just unheard of, and you get that sort of rasp at the start.
There's a lot of
I love that.
So that actually leads me. So you've held up probably 3 or 4 different asymmetrical picks today, and so this is kind of leads me to the other main question that I love seeing that a lot of these more modern pick makers are doing these interesting asymmetrical thing that may even have 2 tips, like you can flip like one in the back and one in the front type of thing, and maybe even a third at the bow, like sometimes at where they kind of so the third thing, and it's not a triangle, but it's funky. I'm wondering, what about that's interesting. Is that Arkham?
Dragon's Heart. No, that's Dragon's Heart.
Oh, it's
So
Dragon's
he
Heart.
cut them. Oh, can't get the staff. He cut that so that you had your normal striking tip. I'll hold it in front of my face. You get your normal striking tip there. You get your round tip for doing your chord work, and then you've got the pointy bit for doing quick work.
Yeah.
That's the idea anyway. Yeah. I
Well,
think they're
what do
really
you
cool.
know about the history of that? Because I think you even picked up a couple of vintage picks that were like that. That one, that rubbery
yeah.
one, that was an
Yeah, yeah.
asymmetrical piece, right? So that's an old shape, an old idea, I guess.
Oh yeah, the triple tip thing goes all the way back to like the 30s and 40s, where you had companies like Herdem in Germany were big on that, and there was a couple of patent applications. About 20. Oh god, I want to say 23. Thereabouts. But there was a whole thing about grips and how the grip thing that we have now, that your Dunlop prime tones or flow series that have raised stipples, that we totally take for granted in this day and age. The grip thing has always been a thing for people. I showed you that cork grip thing from earlier on. So cork I would like for cork to make a comeback. I think it's cool. But the cork thing was very prevalent going way back. Companies like Herdem and Cohen and things like that were trying to do multi-tip plectrums. So in the modern era, you've got Bog Street, your boys that do the Axe series like these. Shout outs to Paul at Bog Street. He makes some good stuff.
I still haven't tried those yet. Those look really cool.
He's doing Altem now, man. You've got no excuse. Get in there. Give him a
Really?
shout. He's a lovely dude. Yeah, really, really nice guy. Check out the Axe series. They're fantastic. But that idea of having multiple tips goes way back. And even before it was gradiated tips, people were doing picks where you had the helicopter design, as it was referred to. So you had like a metal ringlet going through the center of essentially what was 3 plectrums. And then you could wear one out, flick it out the way, get the next one in, flick it out the way, get the next one in. But the really interesting one for the multi-tip stuff was a gentleman called Conrad. Is it Conrad Cohen? Conrad Cohen, that was his name, sorry. And he developed a thing that ended up being used by another company later on, who've got a big P brand, and I can't remember what they're called. But anyway, he developed this system, which was basically they kind of look a bit like, those of you who are familiar with this, the Andy Loomis Sharp, the Dunlop Ultex Black Ultex one, which is super, super pointy.
Oh, the Jeff Loomis?
Jeff Loomis. What did I say?
Andy Loomis?
Andy Loomis.
Jeff
not
James.
A guy.
Jeff James, Andy Loomis.
Jeff Johns. Yeah.
Jeff Jones.
That's
what
I'm talking about. Yeah. So his system was basically that, except that it had 2 large studs at the top that interlocked. So you had piece, but you could have them one going down, one going up, which is a crazy system. But it's kind of a forerunner of things like, in a weird way, things like the attack pick and the Landstrom shark fin. The whole idea being that you had, because you of striking the string, you would get your overtones and all that sort of stuff, because you're hitting the string, then you're hitting the harmonic bite point on the string, that's generating your octave up, which is giving you your 12 string sort of sound. But that style goes back to, I'll find me picture of it in my book, because I like to try and be as correct as I can. So there's your number 84, 1940s, and even in the 20s, Wurlitzer catalogue with a vacuum grip. So that was how they used to do them back in the day.
Oh,
so
wow.
That's 1940s with your 3 tips. And that there, which is metal rivet going inside, that's from the 1920s. Interestingly,
Cool.
You've also got a ring system that Wurlitzer had a go at back then, which would be the forerunner of Depic Argentina and all that sort of stuff. So a lot of these ideas, while they were implemented back in the day, didn't necessarily come to fruition until somebody found a way of realizing them correctly. So not in the pick game, because it's so tactile, not everybody gets it right the first time. So
right,
just the nature of things.
Well, on that note, I was trying to sit here trying to figure out what the name of this pick manufacturer is, because I haven't seen them anywhere. I met this guy at Summer NAMM a few years ago, and he's gave me a handful of picks, and they're all funky, but they have basically the same shape, and they have 4 tips. And they've got a pig. There's a pig snout on it, so it's like it's hard to tell because they're see-through, but you can kind of see that there's four distinct tips here.
It might be a piglet. That's too close.
It's hard. It's hard to tell because it's hard to tell that there is a pig snout there, because it's all like there's other lines on the other side.
I like that.
And I've got this is that was a thick one. This is a thinner one here. You can kind of see through it a bit. But I like a couple of the tips on these.
Mm-hmm.
And it's cool to turn them around a little bit, and you make this one's a tiny bit smaller than the other ones.
I think those are rad.
It's really cool. Look, I wish I wish I could figure out what the name. I'll have to try to take a better picture of the face of it so you can kind of see the snout. It just says like this one's called a razor, but I don't know. They're interesting picks, and I figure I was kind of talking to Jimmy Dunlap. I was like, hey man, like these, have you checked these out? Like we don't need to do the same thing like this, but just the wide but sharp approach is really neat. So it's kind of in the way that a flow pick is, got a little wider geometry. This has got like a wider approach to a pointy pick.
It's got a little bit of the in terms of makers that are because I would love to know who that is, because some of these people just come and then make stuff and then disappear. If you can send me close-ups of that, I'll find out for you for sure.
Yeah.
It looks a little bit like Pyro Picks in the US, formerly Glitch Picks, does a multi-tip thing like that, which normally I could just lay my hands on, but is in a box somewhere. And also, I mean, your multi-tip guys in the modern era, Dragon's Heart is obviously one of them, but you've got Pyro and Bog Street, and there's a couple of others, Valley, doing multi-tip stuff. I think
this is the Jazz really cool. 3 size one. It's the same shape, but a little smaller.
If this picture was a little bit more in HD, I could probably read that and give you a bit more info on it, but I think those are rad.
I know.
Very cool. It's got a little bit of the Zoofoys about it. Zoofoy is a company I would like to, if you will indulge me, I just want to say a very quick thing about this.
Please.
Talking about our lost history and everything. There's a gentleman called Malte Sadler, who was an architect who lived in Germany, and he was one of the people that I got in touch with really early on, and I sent out a bunch of emails to people saying, hi, I run this website. At the time, it was just a blog, like a WordPress thing. It's like heavyrepping.wordpress.com. And I just wrote the same. I basically do what I'm doing now, but it was less fancy. And I got in touch with Malta, and I said, could you, if you're into it, can you send me one of your picks and I'll write about it for you? That's all I'm asking. If you don't want to send it, it's cool. I'll buy some off you later. But I'm trying to, big the scene up and share it with more people and stuff. And some people were like, no, or some people said, no, I'm not interested in doing that. Some of them didn't get back to me at all, but a couple of them did. John from Superbite did. Chrys from Dragon did as well. And we became very good pals and everything. But Malta sent me one of everything he had ever made, including a bunch of stuff that never went on the market and a bunch of things that he'd made by hand on his table. And to this day, they remain some of my absolute favorites. Sadly, I was in correspondence with him. I didn't know he wasn't well. He's younger than me. I think he was, I guess he would have been in his mid-30s. I was talking to him, and then I didn't hear from him for ages. And we were talking, a couple of times a day by email, and then it started becoming less and less frequent. And then I got an email saying, I'm in hospital, and it's pretty bad, and I think I might get out, but I don't know. And then I was trying to interview him before, because I was like, I don't know what the circumstances are with this, but I really want to share this guy's work with the world because it's so crazy. Everything he made was mad as balls, and it had, you know, he developed this pick called the Go, which is this, it's kind of like a Jazz 3, but not really, and it's made out of black Ultex, but it's asymmetrical. You can only hold it one way around, and it's got this really kind of like urgent, eager, joyful sort of sound to it. And it was the first pick that I came across in my whole thing where I really felt like myself as a player. Like you learn all this stuff, and then you don't, you know, you ape this person and you try and learn this and you try and do that and you try and get up to speed with this. And the Go was the first pick that I played, and I felt consolidated in myself. And I said, I don't need to be, I just want to be the sort of player I am instead of trying to compete with other people, which is not an easy thing to learn. It's a very easy thing to say out loud, but it's not an easy thing to do. And he, sadly, I never got a chance to interview him because he died in hospital. He was emailing me from hospital, and one day I just stopped getting emails from him, which is very sad. And Plectrum, Tibor from Plectrum, who is in Germany, he kind of knows Malta's family because they use the same injection molding company, weirdly enough. And I got him to try, his Twitter is still up. It's not, 30, 40 followers on it or something. It's mostly him talking about the snooker, if I'm honest. But he had this amazing idea for making picks, which was just like, he wanted to make a pick that had no chirp. Chirp is a big thing in our game when you go over the 2 mil threshold and you start to get that of your string shortening to the point because you got way more contact with string and everything. And some materials are better for it than others. But his whole thing was he wanted to make stuff that didn't do that. And all the picks he made, the Go, the Rost, the Moon, the Zap, the Daub, and all that sort of stuff, they were made from materials that made no sense, like graphite infused vulcanized rubber. He used graphite. He made a pick called the Rost, which I think Nile Rodgers had one of, and it's the only pick I've seen. I'll need to dig it out, but it's like a wireframe thing. So if you bent it over your thumb, it would just break. But he made them just for doing disco, and like it's such a weird way of. He wasn't a great guitar player or anything, and he just
it's for doing disco.
Yeah, it's for like like that.
Okay, making sure I understood that right.
Hold on a minute, I've got to show them to you because there's something else. But I. The reason why I'm saying this is because this guy's stuff will never be made again. He doesn't have, no one's got the original anything for these. They just exist. And I have some stuff that only one was made and he made it by hand. And this stuff will never happen again, partly because it wasn't especially practical, but partly because it's the product of somebody who had a very singular view of the world when it came to design. And it's a distillation of what the Plectroverse as a community is, what it's all about. You don't need to do this. We don't need to make picks that are true. We don't need to make picks that are made of, camel bone, and we don't need to make stuff that's made out of celluloid acetate or carved from Gaboon ebony, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't. And somebody somewhere picks that up and goes, good God, what have I been doing all this time? I've been playing this stuff, every time I give somebody, people can never test this stuff out. Like we come back to what we were talking about earlier. People can never test this stuff out. And every time I give them the opportunity, I take my briefcase around somebody's house and I say, right, in the I Rest My Case series, and I say, here's my briefcase. It's got at least one of everything I have, 3,500 picks, whatever. And I say, here's one of everything I have. I'm not going to tell you what to look for. Have a dig. Then when you show interest in things, I'll point stuff out. But to begin with, it's totally up to you. And they take something out and they try a bunch of things. And I see their eyebrows go over the top of their head. And they go, right, how is this a thing that I'm not aware of? I go back to what I was using before, and it feels like I'm playing with a bus ticket. It feels like I'm not engaged anymore. I feel like I don't have the contact. And it's given them the opportunity to do that. And these, truth be told, as much as I've collected some of the most unbelievable stuff that's available worldwide, things like these, this little go, which he couldn't even fund on Kickstarter for the tiniest amount of money, but he went and made them anyway because he damn well wanted to. That was what changed my whole experience playing the guitar on a fundamental level. And it'll never get made again. These ones here, these are the Rost ones I was talking about.
Ooh, that's
Look
really
at that.
neat.
See how impractical that is? Like I could.
That's the one that's made out of wire.
It's just it's a wireframe plastic construction. I could, if I thought about that too hard, it would break. You know,
it's the disco pick.
That's the disco pick, and this one. This is one of my all-time favorite. Just looks like a button. Yeah. I did a wicked photograph of this sitting on a pin cushion in a tailor's office.
That's awesome.
I don't know what that's made out of. I'll never know now unless I send somebody getting chemically tested. But I kind of don't want to know because that's
right.
These are the ones that he made by hand on his kitchen table, and he's not even cut the holes very well. It looks like it was cut with a drill that wasn't in a clamp. It was just a guy going. Do you know what I mean? But, but that's these are the whole thing with the pick and is that it's an event. It's something that every time I get one of these, I put my hands on it, and it makes me want to play the instrument I've dedicated my life to playing. And really, at its core, that's the whole point of what everybody does. Whether they're doing it, they're motivated to do it. Certainly not for fiscal reasons, I'll tell you that much. They do it because they feel a compulsion to create this micro art that is also fundamentally utilitarian. And they know that in doing that, somebody somewhere will pick up this thing, feel the same way as they do, and it will change their experience of the instrument forever. And that for somebody to make something as crazy as this thing, which is the Daub, this makes no sense. It's made out of like it's made out of a sort of graphene style rubber. It's not comfortable. It doesn't sound good, but it exists, and it was for him. This made complete sense, and I love that. Right
person. That's awesome.
And there's next to no information out there about that guy. So I'm doing I had Tibor from Plectrum go and translate his Twitter for me and his blog, which was incredibly kind of him, so that I could find out what sort of person he was, so that I could do a piece, like a biographical piece on him, because people need to know about what he did. People need to know about what Joe Macy did. And I share Joe's stuff every week. He sent me he sent me photos of his whole collection, like one of each thing on a memory card before he died, which was not that long ago. And I share that once a week, every Wednesday on Instagram, on Vintage Wednesday, and linked back to his YouTube channel, because some of his videos have been up for, 4 or 5 years. They got like 30 views on them. The guy's he was an infinite well of knowledge on our world, and if that information gets left, it'll disappear, and then no one will know it. And I can't stand the idea of that happening. So,
that's one of the reasons why you're around curating this community that you're working with day in and day out. I think about it in a way like, I mean, most people are probably like, oh yeah, that's sad, and then like, but if I can't get the pics, or if there's nothing that I can follow through on, then you just have to be interested in the history. You just have to be interested in the knowledge. Which then, closes the gap on a lot of people, because, it's only a fraction of of even the pick playing audience that land in the Plectroverse and land on one of our pages interested in something other than the normal stuff, right? So good on you for preserving that knowledge and continuing to pass it around. That's cool.
I think it's I think it's important. So
yeah,
hopefully if you're listening this deep in the thing, you probably think it's important too. That's my hope anyway.
Have you done any kind of I know you must have, because you've done some like grip comparison type reviews and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And assuming that you've gotten your hands on one of the Meshuggah picks, do you know this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they're pretty wonderful. I think a lot of the modern Dunlop stuff, and this, I'm not saying this because of your connection with the one of the
big
world's
D
dominant pick companies. But I think the modern, it's an interesting time in the mainstream, because you started to get companies like Didari were doing picks out of casing, which has always been a boutique thing, and Dunlop with the Prime Tones, the new Delrin series, with all their artist signature stuff, and with the Flow series and all the raised dots. Both the fact that they're both doing them as gloss and matte finishes, and starting to do, the Prime Tone standard comes with oblique bevels, and which has always been a Gypsy Jazz thing. I think the fact that that's happening now is a tacit admission of the fact that there's more to life than buying a 351 in orange with square sides.
Right.
And I think a lot of that is really cool. I always say to people that I did a video a while back, where to get started with Dunlop picks, because if you want to get into Gypsy Jazz, you might start with Jazz Polycarbonate or Delrin 500 2mm. If you want to play acoustic, you might start with the nylon stuff and keep it in and around a millimeter, or go for a Herca Holy Grail, which I think are tremendous for acoustic work.
So good.
I love the fact that people are taking it more. They're not just doing it as a limited run. They're doing it as, giving it ubiquity. The Hetfield White Fang is a tremendous bit of gear, especially if you go to the thicker ones. And I'm not saying that because I'm a thick snob. Ultex works better when it's comfortably over a millimeter.
I agree.
Jazz 3s, all that sort of thing. I think they're rad.
Yeah, man. I wonder. And the reason why I even bring up the Meshuggah pick is it's sitting here, and it's one of those things. Once I start touching it, the grip is so intense that like I can't. I'm like, and I love that. Frederick is like, we got to make it like a cat tongue. Got to do the cat tongue.
Cat tongue. That's like, what was the guys that did that? They were called Brain Picks. And they've got that same thing. Clayton did a similar thing where they have like the super tiny little dots and stuff, and that's like real Velcro-y, sort of raspy. That's super important, especially if you're playing a really heavily syncopated style like what they do. It's important if you're going, then you need to be absolutely 150% sure that you're not going to drop the thing.
Yeah. This is the thing about this pick in particular, because it is your basic 351 shape, but in a 0.96 thickness, but so it has just enough flexibility in it, but that grip, if I stop playing other picks and I only play the Meshuggah pick for a while, I forget it's so. I just forget that there is even a pick there. It's like it becomes more one unit, and I'm like, I almost feel like I'm playing with the tips of my fingers. It's a weird. It's hard for me to explain, especially when you're galloping and you're really getting to the flow of the right hand. There's something that happens there that I haven't really noticed with another pick. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's something people don't think about. They don't think about skin type, and they don't think about grip strength, and they don't think, because of course you don't.
Yeah,
you just, you kind of just. I freely confess that up until I really got deep in this and I started playing acrylic and it kind of opened my whole eyes to the depths and or even the seagull above the iceberg of the pick scene. That I had a very similar outlook. I always liked collecting different ones without having any real goal, real end goal for it. But the difference it makes when you find something that really, really bonds with you, and something that doesn't feel like you're holding a thing. I always use it. It's like the drive pedal thing. You spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours like finessing down the nuance of what you want your drive to do. And once you have done that, once you have found the thing that you can just leave the knobs alone and go off, on, that is subconsciously, that is a fundamental part of your performance that is no longer a concern. So I'm up on stage and I'm doing my thing and I'm playing my songs I've spent the last 6 months crafting. And when I put my foot on the gas, it sounds like that. And I know it's going to sound like that. And I don't think about it. And it means that I can commit more of myself to this piece that I've concocted. And the pick is exactly the same thing. I searched through all this stuff. I've got stuff that I like, and I'm going to say stuff that I prefer rather than dislike. But at the same time, I know everything's got a place. Even if it's the chirp cheapity cheapest, or like the most fancy PRS 10 top, you know, I think it's all got a place. It's got a person whose life will forever be changed by its inclusion. But there are certain things that I pick up and I know it's just not a thing I'm going to have to think about again. I do the thing, I'm going to be inspired to create this piece of music as a result. Sometimes I play stuff for so long that I start to not get inspired by it anymore, that I'm just so familiar with the tone it's going to deliver or whatever that I'll swap it out for a bit. And then I come back to it a couple of months later and go, there you are again. Let's reread this book. I know how it ends, but I still want to hear the story. And that's the whole, I think it's super cool.
Yeah. No, that is very, very cool. I love, dude, it's endless in so many ways. I don't know, what is this pick? This is Anatomy of Sound. Do you have some of those Anatomy of Sound picks?
I do. Have you got the one with the bottom?
I got the bottom.
The one with the lady's bottom on it.
That's a lady's bottom there.
That is a lady's bottom complete with thong. I don't know if you call them thongs in the United States, but
flip it around, and you got
the front part of the bikini section. Yes,
the front part of the thong. That is like one of the more interesting picks that I've got.
He sent me a whole, Larry, I think his name is. He sent me a whole bunch of them, like the whole range. And actually, if you happen to be watching this and you're a mandolinist, get your hands on some of those, because the softness of that attack, especially the white ones, it is a bit weird holding somebody's arse. But like if you use it on the mandolin, I've got an octave mandola here, and you play it on that or on the dulcimer or an acoustic, it's got the softest, most flowing sort of attack to it, and the tip is really, really thin, even though the rest of it is quite significant. And it means that you have this, like, you've got this real secure sort of robust element in the grip section, but then the tip is loose enough that when you're doing all that sort of like trim picking stuff, it's just going wicked, no problem. But then it is buttocks.
It's interesting. My thumb naturally goes to the bum, and my finger goes to the frontal part underneath. I don't know. I tried it the other way.
So genteel.
The pubic region.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, you know what? If you make a pick that looks like that, you gotta ride the whole. I mean, it's called Anatomy. It's got the sandy buttocks on the front of the packaging that he puts out and everything. You know, you got don't train as a jockey and be surprised you're riding a horse.
They just need to figure out how to color in the panty line, right? Like, so that it's, yes. I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna get.
That's one for now, for sure.
Yeah. Hey man, so next year when you release these, next year, can you make I want a green bikini bottom on mine, or pink or something. I don't know. That'd be a way to customize it for an artist, I guess.
Yeah. He's got a lot of shredders on tap, man. It's just one of those. It's just one of those things. Loads of shredders go for those for some reason. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Shredder, so I get it mechanically. I get it. But anyway.
Yeah. One last thing. I was curious your thoughts on. My buddy just encouraged me to pick up some of these stylus picks. I've been playing.
Oh yeah.
this thing, and I know this is kind of old design, but like, what do you know about
Mhm.
this thing and trainer picks?
So really interesting. These come up in pick collecting groups every now and again. Some they are available to get hold of, but they're in quite small numbers because a lot like the pointless picks I have, which are quite literally circles, they didn't sell because they're just too weird. But I think that those are a perfect example of somebody saying, "I want to do a thing. I don't care if it's going to work in the wider sense, but I think it's a great idea. I'm going to do it." And the idea behind the stylus thing was that because you have this sort of circular, almost conical tip to it,
Yeah.
and it's pointed, you've got the whole surface area to hold, and then just this pointed bit at the end. It's done in such a way that you're going to go through the strings like they're not even. You're not even going to think about it. I think they are fantastically cool, rather sort of retro design. I think there's a reason why guitarists don't go for them. I think guitarists are by and large quite orthodox, as much as they would prefer not to think that that is the case. But if you want to see just how orthodox they are, post a picture of a white telly on Instagram. It's just a telly, and you'll see the lights go because people just go, "Oh, it's a thing I recognize. It's cool."
Yeah.
But the stylus is like the stylus is an example of a thing that happened that was the product of somebody's sort of fever dream interest, and somebody somewhere. I haven't got any. I've got tons and tons of other stuff, but I haven't got any of those because sometimes it's like doing it for. It's like the Jared Dines thing, which I know is a bit of a weird parallel, but you don't need that guitar with the giant surfboard neck, but because that's expensive. But he's doing it because he's doing it for the meme, right?
Yeah.
For me to get a hold of those when I could spend my extremely hard-earned rep dollars on buying something practical, trying to get a hold of those when the prices are now inflated because there's not that many around, is a bit nuts. But I would love to get my hands on some of them because there's a lot of mad designs out there, and there's oh yeah, actually, here's a thing for you. I'll send this as my parting gift to your wonderful self. Some interesting kit that occurred. That is a pointless.
Ah, cool. Does it have a bevel at all, or what's it?
Nope. It's
just flat.
It's flat. it's flat, and it's got this raised bit in the middle, which manages to be both fantastically impractical and incredibly uncomfortable at the same time. These are also made from. He made these from acetal and Delrin, I think, and all of them both sound bad and feel bad. I don't normally. I'm big on not bashing people's gear because I don't really do that. But these aren't made anymore, so that's totally fine. And this one, which is a leaf.
Wow.
Yeah, this was sent to me by a gentleman called Eric in the pit game, which is really cool. That's your oval. That to date.
Whoa.
That is. I'm not a fan of this because it's only beveled on one side. So the front's beveled, weird, but the back's not. So the back's rough as hell, and then the front of it's like kind of smooth, but then it's also too big to hold comfortably in any position. But somebody somewhere thought that was good. And then all the way from the United Kingdom, ladies and gentlemen, it's the Raptor.
Ooh.
And weird sauce. Looking. Yeah, this is acrylic. On paper, I should get on with this. It's about 3 mil thick. It's acrylic. It's very weird, which is usually my sort of thing. But it's unique in that I've only met one player who uses these in real life. I know people say they use things, but I haven't met them. That is a surreal experience. You can still buy these; they're still being made, so somebody's buying them. But they are 3 tips. It's kind of like the Dragon's Heart thing: one for doing super fast stuff, one for chords, and one for something. But that's somebody's ideal thing,
Yeah, somewhere.
Long may it continue, because some lunatic is going to come out with something that doesn't make any sense on paper, and it's going to blow everybody's minds, and then we're going to be like, oh, why didn't I think of this before? You know? Or maybe they won't. Maybe they'll just keep making bonkers stuff, but then I'll start writing about it, and then you guys will all know anyway without having to try it out.
One way or another, we'll know.
Doing it so you don't have to.
Yeah. Thanks for taking one for the team.
I'll fall on that grenade quite gladly.
Well, John, man, thank you so much for spending over 2 hours with me and chatting about the nerdiest of the nerdy things that come with plectrums, some history, some artist conjecture and comparison, and just thanks for sharing a bit about your life and how and why you're doing the thing that you do. It's important to me as a peer of yours that's out here trying to spread the good word and encourage people to be diverse in their choices, and to not get stuck in one narrow area, to venture out, even if you do come back to your 351, and that's your thing, and but you should spread a little cash around in the Plectroverse and see what happens, because you're making somebody's day, as you mentioned. It's usually one person, maybe a second person that's a partner or life partner, that's kind of employed by the situation, but you're usually putting food on somebody's table when we purchase.
And you buy from somebody like Tantris or Northern Ghost or Zen or anything like that, you cannot conceive, unless you are also a small business owner or somebody making, craft and stuff, you cannot conceive what that means to that individual, that you took the time out of all the choice in the world. You didn't have to go and seek those things out. You didn't have to do them, but you did. And somebody somewhere's going, hey, you want the thing I made just because I really want to make it? That's amazing. Mm-hmm. All that wall back there, you see this thing that I'm pointing at, that there is all the letters that I've had from makers, from collectors, from people saying, this is really cool, here's some stuff, check it out, look at all that, look at what you've done, look at this thing, blah blah. And I kept all of it. I keep the envelopes and everything, because that's my side of it. That's knowing that somebody's had their experience changed, and that's everybody in the game's the same. And I would also like to say, before I go, thank you very much for somebody in your position, with your history with Dunlop and Kiesel and everything else, for throwing light on this, because a lot of people don't even know we're here. And that doesn't change the fact that the scene is here, because the scene will always be here. But for someone to take the time and to care and to ask me enough to want to know about this is a huge thing, and I truly appreciate that.
It's my pleasure, man. And keep up the good work, dude. I always enjoy seeing what you have to offer, and I love seeing all the new things from all the different. I feel like if somebody finds you, then somebody finds me, and if somebody finds me, somebody finds you, right? So and I just love knowing that you're doing the deeper work that I don't have the time or the joy for, to be honest. My time and joy goes into the conversation, the relationship, a little bit of nerdiness, some this and that. But that's why I got you, man. If I need to know, I'll give you a call.
I'm always happy. Always happy to do that.
Yeah, if you need to know something that's more personal to an artist, you can always give me a call, and I'm like, hey, I'll find out. So yeah, thanks for doing the things that you do, man. And
Much obliged, my friend.
Yeah, hope you have a great night, and let's stay in touch. Is that you cut out? Give me your sign off one more time.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, from myself and my wonderful friend with whom I have spent the last couple of hours, it has been a true pleasure. And please go and check out Players Pick podcast episodes further if you haven't already, because it is a who's who of the who's who in the biggest book of who's. My name is John Tron Davidson from Heavy Repping. Just remember, if you're not sure what to do in life, rep hard, rep heavy, and I'll see you soon.
Players Pick podcast, picks and perspective with Chrys Johnson.